Lesson 54, other types of evolution. We will discuss the other types of evolution that can occur. And of course, these are just names that we give to evolution. All evolution is just slow changes over time caused by some kind of pressure. But yeah, and I guess this thing is natural selection or would be like a form of, I guess, artificial evolution. But we're talking about just some of the other ways we talk about evolution, some of the other words we might use. So what we did talk about last time was we talked about two types. We talked about, firstly, we talked about what do we mean by species. So a species is usually two animals or two organisms that can't breed. I have to always be careful, and I'm always using this word. And this, when I'm writing these lessons, and when I'm using, when I'm writing these lessons, and when I'm talking about these lessons, I try my best to use the word organism. I know that a lot of my examples will involve animals, and that's because we understand animals really easily. But whenever I talk about evolution, think about it. I could easily just be talking about plants. Plants breed as well. So if I took an apple tree and tried to breed it with a banana tree, it wouldn't work. They wouldn't produce any offspring, and that's because they're just not compatible. They're not the same species. So that's something that you need to understand. You can maybe, and I have seen people that have bred like oranges with like mandarins and stuff like that, and they're similar. It's the same as sort of breeding a donkey with a zebra, but those offspring can't produce new trees. So yeah, that's the same sort of thing as saying they can produce offspring, but they can also, when you make a new species, you have to make sure that the newer species can't breed and stuff like that. So we talked about speciation. Speciation, when a new species is formed, but this can happen in a number of ways, and we talked about some of those ways. We can tell speciations occur when a new population of organisms occur. They can no longer successfully breed with the old population. You can even say they can breed, but they don't produce offspring that can then breed. So like a mandarin orange hybrid might be good, but it might not be able to then breed and make new mandarin orange trees and so on and so forth. And this is an example of the finches that was Darwin sort of recorded. He said, well, they originally probably all came from this one finch, but as the island separated, this led to different food sources being available, which meant that we had different birds' beaks sort of taking priority. We talked about phyletic evolution, this is evolution over time, and then we talked about Telecandia, which has these two mouse populations, and then over time, because they get separated by this massive river, they evolve differently, and one of them looks really creepy, and then one of them looks, with a long nose. We say, well, the long nose is great for dealing with insects and blends in with camouflage, whereas the white one blends in with different camouflage, has teeth because it needs to like hunt more birds and stuff. So we say that now we've got two new things because they've diverged. We also say this is called branching evolution. So that's where I said that. Branching evolution. So that's what that is there. We've got new, and those branches can then go off and make new branches and so on and so forth. That's how we end up with the tree of life. And that was where we ended the lesson. No, we didn't. We talked about adaptive evolution. So that radiation. So that's when you take one organism and you make lots and lots of different types of organisms. And so the example in Australia was there was probably a mouse-like creature that essentially has evolved into the Tasmanian devil, the koala, the bush mouse, and the sugar glider. And so what might be really interesting for you to do is to look at these animals and say, well, what is some features that they all have in common that lead you to think that they came from the same animal, the same original ancestor? And I can sort of see that if you look at their ears and their noses, their ears and noses and eyes are all very similar. Especially these two look very similar. and these two look very similar. So maybe something happened there. And of course, the Tasmanian devil lived on Tasmania, which is completely isolated from the rest of Australia for a long time. So it had a long time to evolve to be very unique. So that was adaptive radiation. Today we're going to talk about a couple more different types of radiation. We've only got 3 slides. Let's go. We're going to start with first convergent evolution. Now, this is the first thing I'd like you to copy down. Convergent evolution, this is the opposite of divergent evolution, sort of. Convergent evolution, this is when organisms start to develop similar traits, but without a common ancestor. So the main picture for this is to look on the right. If you look on the right, we've got 4 animals. We've got the echidna, we've got the African aardvark, we've got the southeast pangolin, and we've got the South American anteater. Now, if you look at these animals, right, first thing that's important is that these animals all came from different parts of the world and so far apart that these things could not breed with each other. So these traits are not gained because they, got them from each other. These animals have got these traits because of where they are. And if you look at these traits, they're all very similar animals. They're very low to the ground. They're all brown. They all have a hard sort of, skin. 2 of them have got spikes on their skin. I always found that really confusing. It was like, so the echidna and the echidna and the porcupine are the same. It was like, no. Huh? And I was very confused. And so what you can look at is if you look at these animals and they both have, both have long snouts. That's another thing that's really common. And that's because if you think about it, these things eat the same type of food. They all eat ants, so it makes sense that they would be evolved to be close to the ground. It makes sense that they have a hard back because they want to protect themselves from birds and other things that come down and attack them. So it makes sense that they've got like armor plating almost on their back. So that's how that all evolves. And they're all brown because they're all close to the ground. So they need to be, color camouflage to the ground. So these things all adapted to look similar-ish, even though they are not related. They don't have a common first. They don't have anything in common. Now, one thing that's important, just because these things look the same doesn't mean that they could breed. I think that's one of the things that this is why I said sort of. A convergent evolution may mean that these things start to evolve similar traits, but it doesn't mean that these things could then breed. I couldn't take an echidna and an anteater and get them to breed, even though they look a little bit similar. It wouldn't work because they're still going to have very, very, very different DNA, even though they sort of look a little bit the same. It's a little bit like saying, I don't know, no, I have no idea. I'm not going to go with the dumb analogy. So finishing on, usually this is because the traits are selected because of the same selective pressure, like the same food or the same environment. If you look at all of the animals that live in the Arctic, they're usually all white. And that's a convergent evolution because they want to blend in with their environment. It's like they're not necessarily going to be the same animal, but they may end up picking up the same similar traits. Even though they don't have a common ancestor, they may pick up similar traits because that trait is really good for the environment that they're in. If you look at birds which have got eat nectar, they've all got really long beaks or really long tongues. So it's like, yeah, that doesn't mean that they've evolved from the same organism. It just means that that's a really useful trait to have. Remember as well, even though I say a very useful trait to have, that doesn't mean that the animals get to choose when they're having children. I want my child to have a really long nose to eat nectar. No, remember, evolution is random. It's like maybe they'll get a longer nose that'll help them eat nectar. Maybe instead they'll have a deformed wing so they can't fly and die very, very early in their life. You don't know when you roll the dice for mutation, you could get anything. So you never really know what you're going to get. It just so happens that the ones that can eat nectar really well are the ones that survive. I'm going to change the slide now. We've got 2 slides left. The next slide is to talk about another type of evolution, which is not divergent or convergent. It's called coevolution. Now, coevolution is an interesting one. This is when 2 organisms evolve together and their evolution is tied to their relationship. This is really important here. So one of them is take a bee and a flower. Now, by the way, we could talk about these different types of relationships. I remember I talked a lot about this in year 9 to students. We talked about mutualism. What were the names of them? Mutualistic relationships, parasitic relationships, and there's a third one that I can't remember what it is. Mutualistic, I can't remember. If anyone remembers and wants to throw in the chat, it's going to annoy the hell out of me until I look this up after the lesson. But yeah, take, I think it might be symbiotic, but I'm not sure. Maybe.
I'm pretty sure it is, yeah.
I don't know. The question, the question, Brendan, is that I don't know. There are 3 ways you can describe relationships. And one of them is mutualistic, which is the same as symbiotic, I think, which is when 2, and then you've got parasitic, but I can't remember what the other one is. It's like it begins with a C, but I don't remember what it is. But the idea is
competition?
No, it's not competition. Competition is like, I guess, type of relationship, but we're talking about relationships where 2 interact, but they don't.
Oh, wait, commensalism?
Commensalism, that's the one, yeah. So thank you for that. Oh man, that was going to annoy me. But yeah, if you look at a bee and a flower, they have a mutualistic relationship, right? The bee benefits because it gets a bunch of nectar that it can go away and use to make honey and feed its young and so on and so forth. The flower benefits because as that bee carries around that nectar from flower to flower, a little bit can spread from different flowers, which allows it to pollinate different flowers. So both of them benefit from this relationship. So it makes sense that bees would evolve better ways to access the flower. The flower evolves to have bright colors, are UV visible, and spots, and makes it easy to access the pollen. So it has nice wide open flowers to make sure that it's like, hey, bees, come land here, get some pollen, spread it. And obviously the flowers that are the brightest and the flowers that are the largest, they're going to attract the most bees, and so therefore they're going to be the fittest. The bees that have the longest nose, that have the biggest wings, that can collect the most pollen, maybe they've got these feelers that allow them to pick up more pollen. They're going to be the ones that will survive. And of course, the same with birds as well. Birds with long noses that can actually access pollen from flowers without destroying the flowers, they're going to be the ones that survive. So these 2, their evolutions are tied together. They both benefit from the relationship. So if one organism changes, the other must adapt. Let's just say that for some reason, I don't know, some ground, like, I don't know, maybe the bees have an evolutionary thing where a disease goes through and they can't fly they can't land as easily on the flower, and the flowers will start to suffer. So they might have to evolve so that they can make it easier for bees to land on, and so on and so forth, something like that. The same thing occurs, by the way, in parasitic relationships. So a parasitic relationship is a parasite, like a tick, or so ticks and stuff have evolved to latch onto their host's body and to suck blood and stuff like that. So it makes sense that if the host evolves a way to remove ticks, let's just say or let's just say they've started to get better at scratching, so therefore they can remove their ticks really easily, then the ticks are going to have to evolve a way to grab onto the skin tighter, stuff like that, so they can avoid that. So they both of them evolve. As one evolves, the other one evolves, and so on and so forth. So, and that's how we end up with this idea of coevolution. Now, I'm going to change the slide. Is that cool with everyone? I'm going to do it. I'm doing it. It's happening.
Change it.
There's no pencil here. I just wanted to throw this up. This is actually off one of this. This is similar to one of the style things, but that came up at the very, very start. But it was this idea about coevolution between dogs and humans. And the reason, of course, I put this up, if you guys aren't already aware, I'm sure you guys are very aware, that I'm a pretty big dog person. So I actually care about dogs a fair bit. But, and this is, yeah, it's taken straight from my study because, whoa, hold on, wait, what's going on here? Whoopsies, sorry. Okay, here we go, we're back. So the idea is that dogs and humans evolve at the same time. So what that, yeah, this is definitely Control C, Control V job, mostly because I was running out of time. I was going to do a quick little thing, but yeah, this is just taken straight from this article. But essentially it was like in 2013-14, there's a couple of studies that went out that said that dogs evolved at the same time as humans. So what would happen is that like wolves started to hang around with humans because all the uneaten food, all the uneaten bones would get thrown out, and so then the dogs would eat the bones. And of course, humans would start to give bones and meat to the friendliest dogs, and the dogs, and then that would encourage new dogs to get bred, and then and those dogs that were going to get bred were more likely to be friendly. And so it's a little bit like, normally we would say this is artificial selection. But what also happened is that humans that could empathize with dogs were more likely to survive because dogs and wolves were able to help humans hunt. So we ended up with this coevolution going on, in that as humans, and this is where it becomes more, as humans, the humans that were able to sort of empathize with dogs and sort of look at them and understand what they were trying to communicate and say were the humans that were more likely to survive because they would have a dog companion that could help them get food. And the dogs that were more able to connect with humans were also more likely to survive because they were able to, the dogs that were able to connect with humans and have similar human expressions were the ones that are more likely to survive. And so over millions of years, or maybe not millions of years, over like hundreds of thousands of years, the dog evolved into what we have now. One of the clear ones that you can see that I remember reading is that if you look at the dog's eyebrows. Now, dogs have eyebrows that they can move around. Wolves don't. Wolves don't have eyebrows, pretty much. And you're like, well, okay. And because dogs have eyebrows that they can change, that means that they can have expressions that kind of look a little bit like human expressions. And so therefore they can communicate more effectively with humans than wolves could. And so that communication is what led to their theory that we co-evolved. And I always find this really interesting, that I find that it's like dogs are, it kind of shows you dogs are it's such an important part in human life that they actually, dogs are such an important part in like everyday human life, and in fact, they probably played a part in our own evolution. And there are things now you can look at. There are like, I think there are like dopamine receptors in our brain that release this drug that in our brain that makes us happy when we look at dogs and puppies and stuff. And that drug that gets released is, and a similar drug gets released in dogs when they look at humans, and it's because of this drug, this chemical thing that is actually because of our evolution. So yeah, my dog is asleep at the moment. He's very comfortable. So I'm not sure if we've evolved together, but yeah. Anyway, what are you doing? He's looking around. Last slide. This is it. Last slide of term 3. We're done almost. We're going to finish this lesson about 10 minutes early. So let's get this done. Let's get this copied down, talk about it, and wrap up for the term. Extinction is the loss or disappearance of a species on Earth. So that's when a species dies out. Now, these species could not adapt to changes in their environment. Now, when we talk about species could not adapt to change in their environment, this might be a change in the food source, okay? This might be, for some reason now, or because, let's just say there is a disease that affects all of the nuts, all of the trees on an island, all those trees die, birds go, wow, cool, now I don't have any food to eat, so then the birds go extinct. Okay, if this can be because of climate change. If the global climate plummets, or in our case, gets a little bit warmer, some animals can't deal with that. Some corals can't deal with that, so they go extinct. We actually have a risk of a lot of different organisms going extinct because of climate change. I'm going to hesitate to say this one, but it's sort of, I guess, a change in the environment. If a new predator enters an environment, or if, humans decide to be predators and kill a bunch of random animals, then that can drive them to extinction if they don't adapt or change. And especially with regards to humans, because like we start hunting them and we can wipe out a species in a couple of generations, that's not enough time for species to evolve and stuff like that. Extinction of a species may influence the evolution of another species. For example, an opportunity for new organisms. The example that I've got here is when there were no more dinosaurs, that meant mammals are less likely to be eaten, so they can grow larger. And larger mammals led to essentially that led to human beings and lions and tigers and larger animals and horses existing, because otherwise we would just be, the ancient mammals, which are tiny rats, they couldn't evolve to get really big because they would get eaten by massive dinosaurs. Some other things to pay attention to with that is, like, if you've got these really, really big trees and suddenly, something infects those trees and they all die, well, then now the trees at the bottom of the floor have access to light, so maybe they can grow and change, and we get new species coming in. So it might be a food source, it might be light, it might be water source. Suddenly if you've got it's usually, if you remove a predator, then that means that you can take that role of that predator or something like that. So it's just a different sort of, and there are other things as well that maybe extinction could give access to. So other than just predators, it might be more food. It's like, if you have to fight with this anteater to get ants, and then that anteater goes extinct, well, guess what? You're going to get more food. Your population is going to get larger, and you're going to be able to evolve rather than being stuck competing with this other thing. So competition would be one as well. But yeah, that's extinction, ladies and gents. That brings us to 10:25. That's pretty much all that I had to talk to you guys about today.